This is a vintage Tamiya monster truck, and in today's video I'm going to talk to you about the things you might want to know before buying one and what you can do to modernise it and make it better. Let's get to it. So this rather sorry looking radio control car is in fact a 1987 Tamiya Monster Beetle. Not that you can really tell because it's been fitted with the body shell for a Tamiya Blackfoot, which was out around about the same sort of time. I bought it recently for just £50 because back in the day I used to have a Tamiya Hotshot 2. I think I got that when I was about 11 or 12 and I sold it a few years after that, and more recently I've thought actually that's something I really want to get back into and kind of investigate, particularly now I've got a son of my own and I think it's something he'd be interested in. So this is how it came. It actually also came with some front tyres. Unfortunately, investigating and trying to remove them, they split and tore. So definitely we need a new set of tyres. And it also came with this, an old NiCad battery pack, and there's something that can be done with this Blackfoot body shell. We have all of the original receiver and servo radio gear. It's ACOM's era, Technoplus Mark III, I think would have been the handset that this came with. And everything is complete. It's a bit scruffy, and it certainly needs a bit of TLC, but everything is here in order that we can run it up. So I wanted to talk through about how to kind of modernise this to make it robust and reliable for use in our kind of modern times and improve upon some of the things that we didn't have access to at the time. Better batteries, better motors, better radio gear. So I'm going to take you through that process. But let's just have a quick look over and I can show you exactly what's going on underneath this body shell. So before talking about the car, the first thing to note is that all Tamiya products of this era, and probably still today, use kind of these type of screws, and you might think that's a Phillips head, but actually it's a JIS head, a Japanese industry standard head. And I didn't know this when I had a Hotshot 2 back in the 80s, and I always wondered why my screwdrivers weren't very good, and it's because I didn't have a proper Japanese industry standard screwdriver. So as part of buying this kit second hand, I treated myself to a proper, genuine Tamiya screwdriver, which, as you might expect, works perfectly on these Japanese industry standard screws. The Monster Beetle was a very popular model at the time. We've got your classic yellow CVA oil-filled shocks. We've got our ACOMS receiver up here. This is running the battery eliminator circuit. That was a thing I remember in the 80s. It meant that you could run the receiver gear off the same battery as the motor. Someone's been in here and been fiddling with this motor specifically, and it also looks like there's been a bit of dodgy soldering going on here. So motor's going to definitely be replaced. And then under this cover, the Monster Beetle has this. So I don't know that any of the other cars on this chassis did. We've got our typical setup of twin servos, one for steering and one controlling a mechanical speed controller. And again, I remember in period, my mechanical speed controller, my Hotshot, burnt out. This one hasn't suffered that fate. But one of the upgrades I'll be doing on this will be to replace this mechanical speed controller with an electronic speed controller. Again, back in the 80s, they were ferociously expensive and they're loads cheaper now. So definitely a modification worth doing. I've talked about the tyres as well. So I'll be doing the tyres and then radio gear as well. But all in all, although this car is 30 years old or 35 years old, isn't it? It's actually all complete. Bizarrely though, it no longer has, there should be a brace in the middle here to support these posts. And in order to replace this Blackfoot body here with the correct Monster Beetle one, I need new body posts here. But all in all, I think for £50, this has been a pretty good purchase. So one thing to note as well, when buying these kits, what I noticed was that very few of them seem to come with the original instructions, and they almost certainly get lost. But fortunately, the vast majority of instructions for these kind of cars are downloadable, and so that's exactly what I did. I went to tamiyabase.com and I just downloaded one of the correct instruction for the Monster Beetle, and I've just printed it off and put it in this folder. So I've now got all of the instructions that the original owner would have had in 1987, and I can refer to anything in here and identify anything that's missing or anything that needs replacement. Now, the Monster Beetle has been re-released by Tamiya, so there's a lot of parts still available for it that are re-released parts, so they aren't necessarily exactly the same as original, but it does mean that if you're going to buy a vintage car, something that's been re-released will enable you to keep it on the road because you can swap out re-release parts. And this will be the first range of upgrades. So I'm going to go with a full ball race kit here. These kits at the time were always supplied with plastic bushings in the wheels and in the gearbox. So full metal ball race kit. I'm then, as mentioned, going to replace that mechanical speed controller with this, which is an electronic speed controller, a TBLE02S. This is the speed controller that's now comes with the regular Tamiya modern kits. I'm then also going to change the motor for this slightly upgraded torque tuned motor unit, and then finally I'm going to run it on a nickel metal hydride 2000 milliamp hour pack rather than this sort of unknown NiCad that's old and of unknown quantity to me. And I think for a first set of upgrades, that's going to really help. But before I do any upgrading, what I want to do is make sure that the equipment that I've got actually works. So I'm going to use this battery, which I know has got a little bit of charge in, and a spare transmitter, and I'm just going to spin it up and see if this car works correctly. So in order to test it, I need to plug in this battery, and one thing I would always recommend is you get your wheels off the ground in case anything happens that is a little untoward. Before I do that though, let me talk to you about this. This is a transmitter. I've actually bought two vintage Tamiya radio control cars in a way that that thing happens where you're looking out there for something and two interesting things turn up at the same time. This transmitter came with my other car. I'll introduce that on the channel shortly. But this is plugged in, and by sheer coincidence, it runs exactly the same crystal as this car does, which is band 6. So that's currently on. And let's just plug in here and see how we get on. So we are on, there we go. And what we can see is I've got steering power from the front servo. And then if I use the thingy, we see we've got motive power from the speed controller. Now I've actually run this car up when it first arrived using this controller, and there was a problem with reverse, which is it sticks. And that's the problem with mechanical speed controllers, is that they don't behave as you'd expect. So you have to push forwards to get it to come out of reverse. Could be a trim issue, but as I've mentioned, modernisation means we'll move to electronic speed controller on this and just take that problem away. But the good news here is that the motor's running, the gearbox is working, and receiver and servo are all working. Second part of this video though will see me upgrade this radio gear. So it's great that this works, but what I'll probably do, or what I will do, is remove it and replace it with some of that modern stuff that runs on the 2.4 gigahertz channel. And then you don't get this, which is where it's sort of flickering a bit. But great that this works, and we can now proceed into the next step and start installing those ball bearings. So this kit of Ballraces was very inexpensive, I think just under £8, bought via eBay, but I think it came from a model shop called Time Tunnel Models. And it was a popular modification even back in the day when I had my car 30 odd years ago, to do this, because the Tamiya kits always came with plastic bushings in their in the wheel sets. It was presumably a cost-saving thing, and it was always a common upgrade. Often people used to sell it, you'd be able to buy the ball race kit exactly at the same point as you'd buy the kit to assemble. And it makes an enormous difference to the smoothness running of the car generally. So what we've got in here is just that little bit there is a plastic washer, which is what we need to pop out. And then there's another one here. So if I get this screwdriver, so that is what I am replacing today, this plastic washer. So there's 2 in each wheel, or on each axle, so 8 in total. And that's what this big piece is for here. That's 8 bearings in there. So instead of being a plastic bearing, what we've now got is a really nice sealed sort of cartridge bearing that will allow for a much smoother running. And it should, in theory, just then be a case of popping that in there. There you go. I will pull it out and clean it in properly. But that fits in there, and then another one fits in there. And then rinse and repeat around the car. And then there are 2 further small bearings, let's get them out of the bag, which are there, if I recall correctly from reading the instructions, they go in the gearbox. So let's get on with that little job and get this car fully ball raced up. So I'm just going to interrupt the video there just to show something. This is one of the other disadvantages of buying something that's quite old, is that you can see here that this piece has cracked. Now, it's still holding okay, but in ideal situation, fix that crack or replace it. Something to be aware of when buying vintage radio control cars, certainly. So that's all the 8 wheel bearings now replaced. I've left these components off because I now need to get into the gearbox, which is now around this end. It's worth noting as well, both of these rear swing arms, I suppose, have got cracks in. So this one's got a crack there, and this one similarly has a crack here. Clearly a weak point. So next thing then, gearbox. So with the gearbox out of the car and disassembled, what I've been able to do is find these last 2 bearings, and it's here in this gear here. If I just pop off these end caps like that, and what we can see here is our bronze bushing that we'll replace with the ball race. So just pop that one out like that. So that's our bronze bearing or bushing. Same on the other side. Distinct lack of grease in this gearbox, I notice. And then using our new ball races, it's just a case of popping that one in there, popping that one in there, like that. So with those 2 bushings out and the gearbox reassembled, it's now ready to get put back into the car. So there we go, everything back together as it was, and now we've got all our plastic bushings here in there, and everything is now ball raced up. So the next thing to do is talk about the tyres. And the really interesting thing is that the other vintage Tamiya radio control car that I bought came with a very nearly new set of spiked tyres. Perfect for this. Let me show you. And here they are. Absolutely exactly what you got on a Monster Beetle back in the day. Lovely unused spikes, almost unused. So they are perfect for this project. So I'm going to swap those in right now. And there we go, 4 lovely new Tamiya spike tyres. I think it's time, given I haven't done it for a little while, to take this for a little run up the road. Okay, so here we go, we're outside ready for a little test run. You turn on Acorns here. Gonna try and record video whilst driving a radio control car. Not something I've ever done before. It's working. Right, let's see how we get on. Definitely works. Hard to know what difference those Ballraces have made. Oh, it's got a bit of turn, isn't it? Ah, yes. Some adjustments still to do, but I think for step one, that's a success. So there we go, guys. That's the part one of this video. I think this is going to be a three-parter in actual fact. So second part will then be talking about that new motor, fitting that electronic speed controller, and upgrading that or using that nickel metal hydride battery, and then following on from that, part three, the radio gear and hopefully a new body shell, make it at least look like a Monster Beetle that it is underneath. Thank you as always for watching. If you want to know what happens next, do hit subscribe, and if you like this kind of content, do send me a comment, hit like, and let me know what you think. And I look forward to coming to you in a new video very soon. Thanks and goodbye.